You're muted, Dr. Mathai.
Can you hear me? Good. Thank you very much, Sabrina. I'm very happy to be with you this morning there and evening here. I would like to kind of give you a friendly, loving warning that, I'll be speaking with an accent, and maybe it may not be so easy for you to follow my English. So you have to be a little more attentive than, when your friends in the United States speak. So this is something I cannot help. So please be very indulgent to me for speaking with a very clear Indian or Kerala accent. I've been told to speak about Gandhi's constructive program, and the way Sabrina has worded it is living constructive program. It's a very challenging title, so I'm very happy that you said I'll be giving an introduction to constructive program. You see, constructive program is a package of 18-point program for reconstructing and transforming India, which Gandhi introduced. He wanted to create a new civilization, not just kind of a change in society or in certain institutions of society, but what he aimed at was creating a non-violent civilization. So the constructive program was envisaged as a comprehensive package which will help India, the people of India, to evolve towards creating a non-violent civilization. If you look at the programs, the 18 points that Gandhi has given in his booklet or monograph, you will be able to find that most of those programs are very culture specific. Very culture specific means they are suited to the Indian situation. So like interreligious unity, or what he calls communal harmony, removal of untouchability. Untouchability was a social practice practiced by upper caste Hindus in Indian society. So then promotion of hand spinning and hand weaving and producing what Gandhi called khadi clothes, the clothes that I wear even now. So all these programs have a very specific local significance, a local application. But if you look at the basic vision and approach adopted by Gandhi, you'll be able to see that it has also a universal significance, a universal validity. It can even cross geographical and cultural boundaries and has a significance which is beyond the cultural specificities of this country. Gandhi experimented during his public life. Gandhi experimented with these programs. That was a term which was very special to Gandhi. It was a favorite term for Gandhi. Everything he did, he considered an experiment. An experiment is an open-ended thing. You do something as an experiment means you are not very hard and fast about it. Your approach is scientific. So depending upon your experience, the evidence you gather in the course of your experiment, you are ready to modify not only your understanding, but also your application. So Gandhi experimented with these programs, these 18-point programs at a national level for several years. for more than 20 years, he experimented with them. You know, he was in South Africa and returned to India in 1915. And then for a few years, he did not engage in public life. Then he started his public life. And after he started his public life for more than 20 years, he tried to implement these programs in different parts of this vast country. You know, India is often called a subcontinent. And it was after more than 20 years of experiment that he wrote about it. You know, in 1941, to be specific, he brought out a monograph called Constructive Program, in which he has systematically explained what he means by the constructive program. You know, this is available on the internet. If you just write Google MK Gandhi Constructive Program, you will be able to get a PDF file of this. And you know, Gandhi in his foreword, which he wrote later, not in 1941, this he wrote in 1945, he says, he describes and defines and describes the constructive program like this. I'm reading from Gandhi. The constructive program is the truthful and non-violent way of winning Purna Swaraj. Purna Swaraj means complete independence or total independence. It is the truthful and non-violent way of winning complete independence. And this is designed to build up the nation from the very bottom upwards. These are the three important points that we have to understand initially about this. One, you know, this is a program to transform this country, to build this country, to build a new civilization in this country on the basis of truth and nonviolence. And this program is intended or designed to be worked out from the bottom upwards, from the grassroots upwards, not from top down, but from the bottom up. That's very important. Normally, you know, nation building as we understand it in modern political discourse is something which is implemented from top down. But Gandhi wanted the new civilization, the new nation to be built by the people from bottom up. So these are the two very significant points about Gandhi's constructive program. You know, I would draw your attention to another important point. You know, you have to read Gandhi's constructive program as a sequel, a kind of sequel to his first book, which was written in 1909. And the title of the book is Hind Swaraj, or Indian Home Rule. Gandhi wrote this book when he was returning from London to South Africa, and he was in South Africa at the time. And this book is considered to be Gandhi's seminal work, in which he offers a thorough and total critique of modern civilization. You know, he has understood from his study and experiences that modern civilization or modern Western civilization is rooted in violence, mainly structural violence, which for Gandhi is manifested in exploitation, domination, segregation, conspicuous consumption, etc., etc. What we today call the industrial military complex. This is steeped in violence, rooted in violence. And therefore, you know, it was violent on nature, violent on human beings, violent on the human psyche. So Gandhi said that this is something that we have to reject. So Hind Swaraj not only critiqued modern civilization, but it also exhorted people to reject this civilization rooted in violence, which propagates and perpetuates violence, lock, stock, and barrel, and adopt an alternative civilization. So in the book Hind Swaraj, he also talked about an alternative civilization, which for Gandhi was very obvious. It was a non-violent civilization. So he writes in detail about non-violence in this book. So his main concern was not only when he wrote the Hind Swaraj, but later also his main concern was how to build a non-violent civilization, a way of life. All aspects and levels of life have to be based on non-violence. They have to be organized on the basis of the principle of non-violence. So this was Gandhi's main concern. And in the constructive program, Gandhi is introducing a set of programs which will help people to build a civilization, a social order, a way of life based on the principle of non-violence, non-exploitation, non-domination, non-segregation, based on equality, based on love and compassion. So this is what the constructive program is. May I proceed? Or can I stop and ask people whether they have questions, or shall I proceed, Sabrina?
Yeah, if folks have questions, or if you want to go ahead. But yeah, if you want to take a quick break, see if anyone has any questions, it'd be great.
Yeah. I think people will come up with questions later. Okay. So, I would like to refer you back to some biographical aspect of Gandhi. Gandhi was in South Africa for more than 20 years. He was in South Africa, and he developed his method of Satyagraha, or non-violent direct action, in South Africa. South Africa was his political, moral, and spiritual laboratory to begin with. He returned to India in 1914 and reached India in 1915. And then for more than 1 year, this man did not engage in public life, did not participate in any public activity. On the contrary, he traveled throughout the country. This is a vast country, and you don't have transportation facilities as we have today. So he traveled by train, he traveled in third class coach, where you will be able to experience the ordinary pangs of life. So he traveled the length and breadth of this large country and wanted to see how Indian life really is. And to his great shock, he saw what colonialism has done to India. There was rampant poverty throughout this country in rural areas. There was unemployment. There was famine, social segregation, for which, the colonial powers were not responsible, although they aggravated it. There was exploitation, not only by the colonial powers, there was exploitation by the landlords, by the moneylenders, by the priests, etc., etc. There was domination over the weak by the strong. And so Gandhi found that there were two things that really, really shocked him. One was, of course, the poverty, the rampant poverty that he found, the hunger and poverty of rural India. The second was fear. People were afraid. So people were afraid. They were not ready to come out and talk about their lives. So there was fear. So removal of fear was one of Gandhi's one of Gandhi's priorities in public life. Secondly, there was dependency. The ordinary people were depending on the colonial powers. They were depending on the powers that be, whether it is landlord or whether it is the money lender or whether it is the upper caste people, there was dependency. And along with dependency, there was also what I call despondency. There was no hope, no trace of hope. There was no hope. There was no kind of initiative from the side of the people. So there was total dependency and despondency. What was actually happening? The British people, the British colonial power, whose colony in India was trying to modernize India, what they called to modernize India, and to civilize India. These were the two terms that the British used. They thought that India was not civilized. They thought that India was a very backward country, very obscurantist and superstitious. So they wanted to modernize India. And for doing this, for civilizing and modernizing India, they imported Western institutions and Western industry. Western institutions, their judicial system, their political system, their bureaucratic system, their health system, their education system. So these institutions, they imported their institutions, their industry, and using them, they were trying to modernize India. Gandhi was of the view that if India wanted to imitate the British or the Western powers, India will become only a very pale, weak imitation of the West. Gandhi wrote that India may become a second or fifth edition of Europe or America. This was the condition. So this institutional arrangement of society, of the economy, of the polity, diminished the ability of the individuals, so the people of India, for freedom, for what Gandhi called Swaraj. This is a term that we have to understand. Gandhi made a distinction between independence and freedom. Independence has only a very narrow connotation, narrow significance. It means kind of liberation from an oppressive regime, freedom from political domination of Britain was independence. But freedom was more than that. So Gandhi wanted to give a comprehensive term to signify what he means by freedom. And therefore, he used an Indian term called Swaraj. Swaraj is total liberation. The meaning of the term, the connotation of the term Swaraj is total liberation. And Gandhi gives three dimensions to this term. Swaraj, freedom. What is it? One is that you have to be free internally, within yourself. What he called self-control. You have to have control over yourself if you want to be really free. You have to control your senses. You have to control your mind. If you have no control over your senses, if you have no control over your emotions, if you have no control over your feelings, then you are not free. So the first meaning of Swaraj for Gandhi is self-control, controlling your physical senses, your emotions, and your mental life. And the second meaning is what we today call governance, self-governance, or self-rule. See, you are to be ruled by yourself, not by an outside power, not by a colonial power. So Indians should rule themselves. So that is the second meaning, the political meaning of Swaraj, self-rule or self-governance. And the third meaning is a spiritual meaning, which means self-realization. Swaraj, the final meaning of Swaraj is self-realization. So Gandhi, when he traveled throughout India, into the rural parts of India, understood that the Indian people are not able to experience freedom for themselves because they have been victims of domination. They have been victims of a system imposed on them, structures imposed on them from outside, which is alien to their, strange to their original genius, the genius of their culture and social life. So he wanted to liberate the people from these, fear, despondency, and dependency, and help them. He wanted to help them to be real human beings. He found that there was terrible dehumanization that has taken place in the not only in the rural areas of India, throughout India. And so his aim was to really make human beings fully human, for which the most important thing was to liberate them from the clutches of fear, dependency, and despondency. So to rehumanize the dehumanized human beings was considered to be one of the priorities of Gandhi. So he wanted to liberate the people of India from these clutches of these dehumanizing institutions and structures. And then the question was, how do you liberate people? If you want to liberate people, you need to give them an opportunity. You have to give them an opportunity to participate in the liberative process. Liberation is not something that you can bring from outside and give to people free. Liberation is something that you have to achieve, you have to attain through your own effort. So this is what Gandhi called liberative action, or what today we call empowerment. You have to empower people. And how do you empower people? How do you liberate people from fear? How do you liberate people from dependency? How do you liberate people from lack of hope, hopelessness, despondency? By giving them an opportunity to be themselves. And that is, according to Gandhi, by giving them an opportunity to participate in liberative action. And this liberative action is what Gandhi included in the Constructive program. So the Constructive program is a platform for direct, popular, liberative action. See, for example, if you look at I can take the example of hand spinning and hand weaving and propagation of this kind of cloth. There was a time when India was a very prosperous country, one of the most prosperous countries in the world. And that was why all the European powers, crowded to India and wanted to colonize India. India was not a poor country. I don't say it was an affluent country. It was a very prosperous country. And one of the reasons of India's prosperity was the integration of agriculture and cottage industry, which is a different subject. I'm not going into it. And one particular aspect was, the Indian textile industry. India at one point of time during the 18th and 19th centuries, before the British came, was the largest exporter of textile to different parts of the world. The Britain, when they came and colonized India, destroyed this industry, the textile industry. The artisans many of them were killed, their thumbs were cut off so that they will not weave designs and so on. And they, exported all the cotton cultivated in India to Manchester and Lancashire, then made clothes there and brought them back to India and sold it here and taxed it here. And this was how they did it. And this was one reason for the rural poverty in this country, unemployment and the resultant poverty in this country. So Gandhi said that if you want to liberate people from systemic poverty, the only way was to give them employment. And you need not look up to the government to give you employment. On the contrary, Gandhi said that revive these cottage industries, including spinning, weaving, and several other cottage and rural industries. And that is one of the programs, one of the items in the constructive program, the propagation of khadi. So that was a way to give people an opportunity to participate in a productive economic activity which will provide them employment, which will provide them a kind of a sustainable living income, and it will liberate them not only from poverty, but also dependency on the state as well as on the money lenders. So participation, liberation according to Gandhi is participation in the liberative process. And all items in the constructive program, if you examine them closely, is a platform where people will be able to creatively and productively engage in liberative action. Communal harmony is another example. India was a country of many religions and many languages. And the British people wanted to divide Indian people because for any colonial power, any totalitarian power, the best way to retain power is to divide people. So divide and rule, the dictum of divide and rule. So British people told the Muslims that Hindus are their enemies, and told the Hindus that Muslims are their enemies, and created a rift. Actually, for generations together, they were staying together and there was communal harmony in this country, but they created this division. So Gandhi found that if India wanted to be free from Britain, it was necessary that people belonging to all religions should come together, forgetting the differences. And so communal harmony or interreligious harmony is another program. And then when people work for communal harmony, they will be liberating themselves from prejudice. They will be liberating themselves from superstition. They will be liberating themselves from imposed divisions on them. So that is why I call the constructive program as a platform for popular liberative action, which will help to change the objective conditions of existence of impoverished people. So what Gandhi aimed at was total transformation. So if you look at the constructive program, you will be able to find that there is an economic dimension involved in it. There's a political dimension, there is a social dimension, there is even a cultural dimension. Gandhi talks about language. So India is a country with hundreds of languages and dialects and languages. And so Gandhi speaks about a national link language, which could be understood by all people. And at the same time, you will have to promote provincial or regional languages. So the dimension of culture comes in. So the 18-point constructive program is thus a comprehensive program for changing the objective conditions of existence of the impoverished people. So this is for transformation, total transformation. And when you talk about when Gandhi visualized the transformation, social transformation, he was very particular that it should begin from the individual and kind of develop to the community level. So transformation of the individual and transformation of communities. So this was what he aimed at through the constructive program. So the Satyagraha, for example, Gandhi had a package, and the package, the Satyagraha or nonviolent direct action is also a part of, an inseparable part of the constructive program. So when Gandhi implemented the constructive program through the people, we had an organization in India at that time. So the whole country became very active, very active. And so constructive program was implemented throughout the country through the voluntary effort of the people. So that was how we prepared the way for creating a strong foundation for civil society in India. And this constructive program laid the foundation for civil society in India. So before that, there was no idea about this kind of voluntary action from the level of the people, common people, at the grassroots level and coming up. Then I will mention 2 or 3 other dimensions of the constructive program. The constructive program was not only, for example, you take hand spinning and hand weaving. This was not just about creating employment for the ordinary people. Khadi, the cloth which was made from hand spinning and hand weaving, became the uniform of Indian freedom struggle. People who were participating in the Indian freedom struggle, it was made compulsory that all people spin. So there were millions of people in the country. It is a highly densely populated country. Millions of people throughout the country started spinning because, the equipment was very simple. The charkha, the spinning wheel, is very simple. And its technology is very, very, intermediate. You can comprehend it, you can correct it. So there were millions of people in the country spinning and weaving and, selling this cloth and wearing this cloth. And the first Prime Minister of India has described this cloth as the livery of India's freedom. This became the uniform of India's freedom. So that gave an opportunity for political education. So the masses of India, the illiterate, uneducated, poor, impoverished masses of people of India were educated politically through the constructive program. And that developed what we call a new sense of community. You see, we are Indians. We stand for the freedom of the country. We work for the freedom of the country. So every meter of yarn or every yard of yarn you weave is a contribution to the liberation of this country. It's not only a contribution to your own liberation, but it's a contribution to the liberation of country. And so it gave a new sense of community to the people. So it was an opening for political education. It was an opening for liberating people from despondency and dependency. They said that we can be free. So I don't want to elaborate the story. If you look at the Indian experience of the propagation of the constructive program consistently for more than 20 years, you can see that a new power was generated throughout the country, what we call people's power. People got empowered. A new power emerged, what we call people's power. And, the poor, illiterate, impoverished villager was able to stand up to the might of the British Empire. And in 1942, the people of India told the British to quit India. To quit India. And this strength, the inner strength, and the political consciousness for saying this was actually a creation of the consistent and systematic implementation of the constructive program. So this was a very, very significant contribution of the constructive program. And finally, I would say that constructive program if understood and implemented, taking the local conditions and requirements into consideration. You need not copy Gandhi's items per se as they are, but every region, every locality has its own requirements, its own challenges, its own problems, and you can modify them depending upon the local conditions. But the approach is basic, and the approach is universally valid. And this can act as a check and balance on the government. The problem with the state or problem with power is that, there is a very well-known saying of Lord Acton that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whether it is a colonial power or whether it is a domestic democratic government, the chances of a state becoming corrupt is very common, and we are all in a way or the other victims of this tendency of political power becoming corrupt and corrupting people. And so if people are empowered, then they can act as a check and balance on the political system, which tends to be corrupt. So, and you can make the state as well as the political leaders to listen to the issues of people, the real issues of people. They will have to come to terms with the real issues, the live issues of the people. If people are organized, if people are empowered, if the people are conscious, politically conscious, and this is the base of civil society. So we can make people, the state as well as political leaders, to come to terms with issues and people's problems and listen to them and try to solve them. And you can bring them down from their ivory towers. This was what really happened in India during Gandhi's time. As a result of the consistent and systematic implementation of the constructive program, there was a kind of political awakening in the country, throughout the country, as never before. And people felt free from fear, free from dependency, free from despondency. They became gradually empowered, and they were conscious of their freedom, and they could very easily kind of dismiss an alien government from their own land. So this value of empowering people through liberative action is the foundational principle of Satyagraha, of constructive program. And there is one more point, which is my final point. There is an integral relationship between civil disobedience or Satyagraha and constructive program. How do you train people for Satyagraha, nonviolent direct action? Gandhi says in his monograph that violence requires discipline and training. You look at the police, look at the army, how they are recruited young, they are trained, they are disciplined. And, it requires, kind of very rigorous, systematic disciplining and training. And nonviolence requires more discipline and more kind of systematic training than violence. And so constructive program, according to Gandhi, is a way of training Satyagrahis, people who are capable of offering civil disobedience, people who are capable of taking part in nonviolent direct action. How is it possible? When you participate in the constructive program, or when you take part in the constructive program and they are implemented, you are trained to be disciplined. You are trained to be politically conscious. You are trained to develop a sense of community, and which are very important for this discipline, self-control, control over your emotions, and developing a political consciousness and community awareness are very fundamental in Satyagrahis. And therefore, without knowing that you are training Satyagrahis, constructive program is offering a training package, is a kind of a training package also for preparing people for civil disobedience and nonviolent direct action. Gandhi said that this is an integral and unavoidable part of Satyagraha. He said that trying to offer civil disobedience without constructive program, without the empowerment caused by the constructive program, will be like trying to lift a spoon with a paralyzed hand. You'll not be able to lift a weight through using a paralyzed hand. So the people who are not trained through constructive program will not be empowered. They will not be strong. So this is an empowering, program. Constructive program is an empowering scheme, an empowering package, and therefore this is an integral aspect of Satyagraha. So constructive program on the whole tries to create a non-violent civilization. You see, its approach to oneself, to other people, to nature, all items in the constructive program. If you want to use an environmental term or an ecological term, is nature friendly, the manufacturing of clothes, cottage industries, etc. So it avoids, it shuns violence in any form and try to use non-violence as an organizing principle. So it's based on love and compassion and fellow feeling and, the tendency to care and share with your fellow human beings. And so this is a package that will empower people and help people in transforming themselves and transforming their communities and transforming their culture and creating a non-violent civilization, a comprehensive non-violent civilization. So these are my thoughts about the constructive program. I thank you for your patient listening, and if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to respond to your questions now. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Mathai. I believe Sabrina's been getting questions, and we've all been seeing some questions that have popped up. Sabrina, do you want to share the questions with Dr. Mathai?
Yeah, I mean, folks can certainly feel free to ask them themselves as well. I see one from Catherine. She said, I may have missed a bit of your talk. How did Gandhi get the word out about the weaving, for example? Especially, in an era where we didn't have social media. How did he get the word out about his constructive program and what he was doing?
Your phone is muted.
Oops, you're muted again.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, Catherine had a question about how Gandhi got the word out about the constructive program, about the weaving, for example. How did he tell people across a vast country about this program?
Oh, that's very, very simple. Gandhi first wrote about the spinning wheel, and the Indian term is charka, in the Hind Swaraj in 1909. And that is probably the one and only thing which Gandhi wrote without seeing it. Gandhi had never seen a charka, but he had only heard about a charka. So normally he doesn't write without really seeing it and checking and testing it. But it was about the charka in the Hind Swaraj. He has written about the spinning wheel. But when he returned to India, the first thing that he did was to ask his colleagues, his friends and co-workers to find out a charka, a spinning wheel. And somebody found it out because, the whole textile industry in India was completely destroyed by the British. So people had left spinning and weaving, and all their instruments were kind of rotting or discarded. So it was from the upper story of a discarded building that they identified the first spinning wheel and brought it to Gandhi. But we must remember that there was a time when in almost every household, particularly in rural India, there was spinning and there was weaving. So, cotton, cultivation of cotton was very, very widespread in India. And therefore, it was possible for people to get the raw material. So in the rural areas of India, almost every house, there was spinning as a supplementary occupation. And this was particularly engaged by women. They used to spend their leisure time in spinning. So that brought them an additional income also. So everybody knew about it. Throughout the country, everybody knew about it. And if you just study the history of cloth making, textile, you will be able to find that similar instruments were used universally in all cultures. Something very close to spinning wheel. I have seen a spinning wheel in Mexico, in the Aztecs. When I visited the Aztec community, they have a system of spinning. I have fun in charkas, in their spinning wheel. So in rural India, charka was a very, very domestic kind of implement or equipment, and people knew about it. So that was why it was so easy for Gandhi to reach out to people. He developed a rhetoric in which he took symbols from Indian tradition, Indian social life, and Indian economic life, and gave them a new meaning, a political meaning to them. So that's what you have to understand. The term Swaraj, the term Sarvodaya, the term Ram Rajya, all these things are taken from the Indian tradition. So what is interesting is that he developed a language, he developed an idiom using which he could communicate with the people, and which was not understood by the rulers. He talked in the what do you call, the simple Hindi, and he used all these terms which the British did not understand. When you say charka or Swaraj or Sarvodaya, they don't know what this man is talking about. But the people understood. And therefore, they came to know that here is a person who speaks their language, who uses instruments which are their kind of part of their daily living and daily earning. And therefore, he could very easily reach out with people. He could very easily establish communication with people. And therefore, the people trusted him and saw him as a person belonging to them. Look at the way he changed his style of dressing, the sartorial evolution of Gandhi. All these things are important. So the spinning wheel and spinning and weaving was part of Indian life for centuries together. So it was not something that Gandhi invented, but he rediscovered for himself.
No, Mathai, it seems to me that rediscovery was so wise because it combines so many elements, the economic element, the political element, but also the spiritual element. And I'd be interested in any comment you might have on the latter, because it seems to me that spinning is kind of like an active meditation.
Thank you, Carl, for bringing the dimension also into the attention of people. Spinning requires skill. If you try to spin, you will understand how difficult it is. It's not so easy. When I was in the university founded by Mahatma Gandhi in Gujarat, Ahmedabad, Gujarat, I used to have an international course on Gandhian nonviolence. And we used to teach, crafts to people, spinning particularly, spinning. And it's very hard when they begin, but some of them have mastered and did spinning very well. Spinning requires skill, it requires concentration. So you'll have to concentrate. And when you concentrate, you hear what Gandhi called the music of the spinning wheel. The spinning wheel creates a music. It's not something kind of inaudible. It is really audible, it's audible. So that music is there. And it serves as a kind of a spiritual therapy to people. I can give you two examples instead of just theoretically explaining it. Gandhi established communities. In South Africa, he had the Phoenix settlement. When he came to India, he founded what is called an ashram. An ashram is a kind of spiritual community in the city of Ahmedabad. And there were inmates who were prepared to join Gandhi in his experiments. And they lived in families. And there was a young man in one family who became slightly mentally challenged, mentally deranged. He had a mental problem. And, naturally, they took him to a psychologist, and the psychologist was not able to help. Finally, the boy was brought to Gandhi, and his parents explained to Gandhi that this boy has a problem, a mental problem. And Gandhi said that, okay, you do one thing, you teach him spinning. On a regular basis, the boy was taught spinning, and he started spinning for himself. When you are young, you can very easily learn it. He started spinning himself. And the story goes that in 3 months, the young man became quite normal. His mental kind of problem was completely solved by that. The second example that I would like to give is about a person whom Karl knows very well. He was like a brother to Karl. He is Narayan Desai. Some of you may have listened to him. Some of you may have heard about him. He was the son of the first personal secretary of Gandhi. The first personal secretary of Gandhi was a person called Mathai Desai, and Narayan was his son. He was born in the ashram, and he lived with Gandhi. He sat on the lap of Gandhi and grew up in the ashram. So he was finally, he established an institute called Narayan. He established an institute called Institute of Total Revolution in a rural area in the state of Gujarat. And he wanted me to meet him in his ashram. So I went there. And we had a program in the afternoon. We had evening dinner. And after dinner, we had a cultural program. My students were also there. So he asked me to sing. I sang and he danced and all. He went to bed and he did not attend morning prayer. And we found an hour later that he had a stroke at night and he was unconscious. We took him to the hospital and the doctor said that it is very difficult for him to recover because, the stroke was really hard and all that. But finally, after, almost a month, he regained consciousness and he could move. And then he was an amazing spinner. He asked for his spinning wheel. And the first thing he did was to spin when he was able to sit on the bed. And he started spinning. And in 2 weeks, his improvement was remarkable. And the doctors would not believe that, spinning could act as that kind of a medicine or a therapy. And he returned home, but of course he passed away a few months later. That's another story. So it has a spiritual power, it has a healing power, because it produces a music which caters your psyche and your spirit. So thank you, Karl.
Thank you so much, Mathai. just in terms of timing, we are at the hour. So if folks have any other questions, please feel free to send them via email. We'll be sharing out different contacts, and we will be uploading this recording to our YouTube channel. So I will make sure that everyone gets that link. And thank you again, Mathai, so much for your time and for your wisdom and for helping us better understand the Constructive program. This was so helpful. I'm so deeply grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll meet later. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll join not on all days, but some days, definitely.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mathai.
Okay. Namaste.
Namaste, and see you all tomorrow morning for meditation. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.